Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I know everyone has a full belly, and that is the most challenging time to speak to an audience, but hopefully we can stay awake through this hour. Before I get into the lesson, I want to mention just a couple of things. We've got the things that I brought for GBN that are to your left when you go out. There's some materials, everything there is free. One of the things we have on that table is the card, Where Do We Go When We Die? And it's got a chart that we made up several years ago. It's in a poster form, but it is actually going to trace the lesson that I'm thinking I'm going to, did I lock in the lessons already? Okay, this is the lesson I think is scheduled for tomorrow night. And it is Where Do We Go When We Die? So if y'all would like to have a copy of that, that is back there on the table. If you would like to make a donation to the Gospel Broadcasting Network, you can do that. There is a card swipe that you can swipe, and that is how we support the work that we are doing. We do not sell anything. Sometimes people say, do you need any help? Can we help you? GBN takes care of me. They pay my salary. So if you want to help me, then you can help GBN. And so that is back there that if you would like to make use of that. One other thing that I will make mention of, and then we will get into the lesson, and that is, I wanted to show you my grandbabies. This is Katrina Sella. She is the daughter of our middle daughter, and then Ellie Mae Rowland is the daughter of our oldest daughter. And so Ellie lives up north, and they are in Connecticut. And Katrina, their parents are at Knoxville at the School of Preaching, and they're going to be graduating in December. And my son-in-law has taken a job in West Monroe, Louisiana, so he's going to be preaching down there, not where the Duck Dynasty people are, but in the same town anyway. My granddaughter Ellie Mae, when they named her Ellie Mae, I said, Macy, you know what everybody's going to think, Ellie Mae? And she said, what? And I said, TV show? And she said, Andy Griffith. And I said, no, the Beverly Hillbillies. And she said, Dad, only old people will think of that. So if you thought of that, that tells you something. The lesson this session is, what is your life but a vapor? 4 years ago, I started a gospel meeting in Salem, Virginia, at the West Side Church of Christ. Brother Eddie Gilpin was the preacher there at the time. In fact, this is a shot of their auditorium. Sherry went with me. It was just at the point that all of the kids were getting out of the house and she could travel along with me. And so it was going to be a fun week. Preaching and fellowship and spending time with the brethren. And so we got there. I preached that Sunday. Sunday night, Sherry and I went out to Cracker Barrel together, and I got out my iPhone and I took this picture of her because I thought she looked pretty that night. And so the next day was Monday, and Eddie, the preacher, and his wife Jeannie invited us over to their house for lunch. They said they were going to take us to a little cafe that was nearby, and so we got there and we talked for a while, and then they said, let's go eat. And we went outside. And they said, let's get on the four-wheelers. And I thought, what kind of place are we going to eat on four-wheelers? But they got on one, and we got on the other, and we were following them. And we rode out across their farm to this beautiful area under the trees. And this was the cafe that they took us to. Kind of lagging here. Can y'all bump it back there? All right. I may have to tell you when to bump it if you don't mind. This was the cafe that they took us to. It was just a little place that they set up on their property. And it was a great lunch. And we enjoyed it. We talked and visited, and you couldn't have asked for a better day. When we got through, they said, would you like to see the farm? And we said, absolutely. So we started out across the farm, and we got up to the top of the hill. Let's go to the next slide. And I took out my iPhone and took this picture. It's kind of deceptive because this looks flat, but it's actually a hill looking down. And it was such a beautiful shot, and I had to get a picture. You can see the mountains in the background. And Eddie said, would you like me to take a picture of you and Sherry? And I said yes, and so I handed him my iPhone. Next slide. And he took this picture. Little did I know this was going to be the last picture on my camera before the accident, because it was just minutes after that. As we started down this hill, this is where I go blank. I don't know what happened. Apparently, we hit something. They say the four-wheeler flipped 4 times. Sherry flew off one direction, and I flew off another direction. When I hit the ground, I broke my back, and I severed my spinal cord. And when Eddie got to me, I was unconscious, and he thought I was dead. Sherry said that she was at a distance, but she could hear. She had some injuries too and couldn't get up. And Sherry said Eddie was calling my name, but I wasn't responding, so she was laying there praying to God that I wasn't dead or that I wasn't brain damaged. After a bit, I came to. They tell me I did. I still don't remember any of it. But they said that I began to say, I can't feel my legs. Please move me. And Sherry said from a distance she could hear me groaning, my speech was slurred, and I was hurting, and I was saying, please move me, please lift me. But Eddie, of course, wouldn't lift me because he was afraid he might cause me further injury. They called an ambulance, but we were so far out in the country, it took them a long time to get there. And when they got there, they realized it was beyond their capabilities. And so they called for a helicopter, and they flew me, medevaced me to the hospital in Roanoke, Virginia. Once we got there, it was determined that I had a broken back, and I had cracked my sternum. I had a cracked C1 vertebrae at the base of my skull, and that I had severed my spinal cord. They operated and they fused 5 vertebrae together. I woke up, I guess it was the next day. I still have no memory of any of this. The first thing that I remember after I started down the mountain was waking up being very confused. And it was just me and the doctor. And I said, where am I? And he said, you're in the hospital. You've been in an accident. And we talked for a minute. He asked me some questions, and what year is it? And I said, I can't feel my legs. And I thought maybe it was the medicine. And he said, you've severed your spinal cord. And I said, will I ever walk again? And he said, no. I thought that it was a dream. You ever have that really bad dream and you're thinking, I'll go back to sleep and I'll wake up and everything will be okay? And well, I went back to sleep and I woke up, and I went to sleep and I woke up, and I kept thinking this, and I was groggy because of the pain medicine. And after some period of time, I finally woke up and I realized it was real. And I was devastated. I spent a few days in the hospital, and then they airlifted me to the Shepherd Center in Atlanta, Georgia, where I spent the next 2.5 months in rehab. Go to the next slide, please. In fact, I forgot this one was in here, but this is an MRI of my back. You can see the spinal cord. When I say that it was broken in half, it's literally broken in half. People think of a crack, but it was broken in half. Next slide. This will give you an idea of some of the hardware that's in my back now when they put the bones back together. Of course, they can put bones together and hold them together, but they can't put a spinal cord back together. Next slide. And someone took this picture of me when I was in the hospital. I don't even remember it now, but one of my relatives. Next slide. This was in the Shepherd Center, and they had me in rehab. This thing around the middle was called a turtle shell, and they had that on me so that I couldn't bend. And after the back is healing, they won't let you bend, so for like 6 weeks I wore that miserable device, and it truly was a very miserable thing. You can tell by the look on my face that the rehab was very painful. Next slide. Right after I got out of the hospital, it was time for polishing the pulpit. And they asked me if I would come to PTP and speak about the accident and things that I had learned. I'd only been out of the hospital, I think, about a week, but I really wanted to do this. That night, I was having spasms. I was a disaster. In fact, it's still online if you want to watch it. I broke down and cried numerous times. Emotionally, I was a disaster. Physically, I was a disaster. I don't know if I should have been there, but I really wanted to do it. It has been 4 years since that event, and I want to do 3 things this afternoon. I want to, based on my experience from the last 4 years, number one, I want to make some observations and some applications that I have learned. Number two, I want to talk about some benefits of suffering. And then number 3, I want to make some suggestions about how to deal with tragedy, getting through tragedy. All right, next slide. Number 1, I want to make some observations, some applications about suffering. And the first one is this. Brethren, I have learned that God uses broken people. Before my accident, I was a very confident person. I thought I could do anything. When the accident was over, I was filled with doubt. I was very self-conscious. I told Sherry, I'll never get a good preaching job again. Who's going to hire a paraplegic? But you know, something that I have learned is that God uses broken people. I want you to think about some examples. You know, Moses said that he was slow of speech. Probably means he stuttered, but he was a great leader. David had all sorts of family problems. Rahab was a prostitute. Joseph was abused by his brothers and sold into slavery. Abraham was old. Paul was a Pharisee who had killed Christians. I could go on with examples. But what we cannot allow ourselves to do is become like the one-talent man who was afraid and went and hid his talent in the ground. An older gospel preacher said to me, Don, nobody has greater witness than the one who has been broken. And what he meant by that is when you have been there and you can be faithful to the Lord, you've got a powerful statement that you can make. Think about this. You know, in Job chapter 1, as God is having the discussion with the devil, with Satan, he says, have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in all the earth, one who fears God and hates evil? And Satan says to him, does Job fear God? The King James says, for nothing. Have you not made a hedge about him and around his household on every side? You blessed the work of his hands, and his possession has increased in the land. But now you stretch out your hand against him and touch all that he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. That is, he said, the only reason God, that he serves you is because he's got it so good. He's got a cush life. You take those things away from him and see if he continues to be. He'll curse you to your face. Brethren, when hard times come, and they will, for each of us, they will sooner or later, we've got to magnify God by our faithfulness then. Next slide. I have learned that grief has no timeline. Now, when I was in the hospital, I received approximately 2,800 cards. And I know that because my mom and dad were there with me every day. Sherry was there every day. And my dad was bored, so he counted every single card that came in. And he said, let's hang them on the walls. And so we started doing that. Go to the next slide. And I found this picture. Literally every place on our walls were covered with cards. The man who worked in the mailroom said, I've never seen anything like this before. People would come into the room and somebody came in and said, are you somebody famous? And I said, I'm a Christian. I said, that's what Christians do. I was in the hospital the same time as Kenny Rogers. Go, next slide. This was a picture of me and Kenny Rogers. And somebody said, Kenny Rogers didn't get as many cards as you. And I said, Kenny Rogers is not a Christian. Now, we tried to address that, but nothing came of it. But you know, I have to ask that. You know who Kenny Rogers is? Because I was talking to some millennials the other day, and I said, you know Kenny Rogers? And they said, Kenny who? I thought, they don't know Kenny Rogers. What's the world coming to? Anyway, we got 2,800 cards while I'm in the hospital. I got home. The cards kept coming. We got to about 5,000. No, 4,000. We got to about 4,000, and then they slowly stopped. That's natural. I expected that. But the grief didn't stop when I got home. In fact, the grief got worse when I got home. When you're in the hospital with all the other paraplegics, you feel normal. You get home, and the first thing I did was I tried to go to my desk and work, and I couldn't get my wheelchair under my desk. I tried to get to my filing cabinet, and I couldn't reach. I went out to get in my truck. I bought a brand new truck before the accident. There was no way I was getting into this truck. Sherry and I used to try to walk the neighborhood together, and of course I couldn't do that anymore. So many of the physical pleasures that I had been taken away. I was not able to help other people do things that I used to do. And Sherry and I at the time had been married approaching 30 years, and in that time, she had almost never put gas in her car. I always made sure the car had gas in it, and then I got to where that was hard to do. I just couldn't do it. And then there was the medicine regimen. I was taking like 25 pills a day, all the physical issues that I won't even begin to go into. But where am I going with this? Here's my point. The cards stopped, but life went on. You go back to work, and what I learned is people don't really want to hear about the fact that you hurt all the time. They get weary of that. And so you put on your happy face and you do the best that you can. And there's kind of a loneliness that comes with it because nobody really understands what you have gone through unless they've been there. I get excited when I meet another paraplegic because they understand. But it made me realize that there are brethren all around the world who are experiencing pain. Since I did the lesson at PTP, I had widowers come to me and talk about the grief they've been through. Those who had lost children. I have had people talk about their cancer, about all the tragedies, and about how the grief continues. You know, a person loses their spouse, and we send cards, and we reach out, and we pray, and we remember them for a couple months. And then we let it go, and we move on. But it doesn't go away for them. Let's go to the next slide. I've also learned some things about God's will. Since my accident, I repeatedly, particularly in the early stages, I had people say things to me like, well, Don, this must have happened for a reason. Or, it was God's will. Or words to that effect. Friend, I don't believe that. I don't believe God wrecked me on a four-wheeler. If we are not careful, we get dangerously close to Calvinism and suggest that everything that happens is because God causes it. The fact of the matter is, God gives us free will, and He lets us exercise that free will, and that includes the consequences of our actions. You know, sometimes maybe a drunk driver will hit and kill some little baby, little child. And at the funeral, there'll be a well-meaning person, and they will say to that grieving parent, well, God must have wanted your baby in heaven. No wonder people get angry at God. They think that God killed their little baby. That wasn't God's will. That was some drunk driver who violated God's will and caused that to happen. We need to be very careful, and we need to understand that not everything that happens is God's will. Now listen. That doesn't mean God can't use it. After this accident, I think God used it in some ways that were powerful. In fact, we got back home. We're having to remodel the house because I have to shower in a special chair because I can't hold myself up. And so we're redesigning the bathroom, and we had 4 contractors. And in the process of the weeks that they were in the house, I gave them DVDs that I had done, and in the process of all of this, we ended up studying with them, and we converted all 4 of those contractors and baptized them. Next slide here. In fact, the fellow in the orange shirt, his name is Charles Warren. He is still very faithful. He is preaching. In fact, he's preaching for a little congregation now. He recently, I guess last year now, he baptized his teenage daughter, and he's talking about when she's out of the house going to the middle school preaching. See, God used that. He didn't cause it, but He can still use these things. Next slide. To live is Christ, and to die is gain. Of course, I already knew that. I mean, it's Philippians 1:21. Verse 23, for I am hard pressed between 2 things, having the desire to depart and be with Christ, which is far better. Now, What does that mean? To live is Christ, to die is gain? In fact, he says far better. Now that doesn't mean a Christian should be suicidal, but to die is gain. Brother, do we really believe that? Do we really believe that to die is gain? I'm afraid we don't always believe that. Sometimes the way we behave during COVID, I don't know if we always believe that. I think sometimes we would put physical life over spiritual life because we didn't really believe that to die is gain. But at this point, to live is Christ, and to die is going to be gain. Next slide. I want to talk about some benefits of suffering. Number one, it teaches us to pray. I will admit to you, particularly in the first year after the accident, I struggled with prayer. And the reason was, God wasn't answering me. And I asked brother, I posted on Facebook, please pray for me. Thousands of people all over the world were praying for me. But the weeks kept rolling on and the months kept rolling on, and I wasn't getting any better, not changing at all. The pain was still there. The emotional pain's worse than the physical pain. But it caused me to dig in and study prayer more than I ever had before. I want to share with you a few things that helped me along the way. First is this, 2 Corinthians 12 and verse 7. Paul said, unless I should be exalted above measure by the abundance of revelation, that is, I've got all of this revelation that could go to my head. He said, a thorn in the flesh was given to me. I don't know what the thorn in the flesh was. Nobody does. Based on some things I read in Galatians, maybe it was an eye problem. I don't know. He says in chapter 2, the brethren might have plucked out their eyes and given them to me. Chapter 4, he mentions having to write in large letters. Maybe Paul had some kind of an eye problem. I don't know. Whatever this thorn in the flesh was, I've heard people say God gave it to him. I don't believe that, because look what he says. A thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan to buffet me. The Bible doesn't say God gave it to him. It says it was a messenger of Satan. Now, did God use it? God didn't remove it. Why didn't God remove it? He says, lest I should be exalted above measure. Concerning this thing, I pleaded with the Lord 3 times that it might depart from me. The Apostle Paul prayed repeatedly that the Lord would take it away. But the Lord said no. How about this? Luke 22:41. And he kneeled down and he prayed, Father, if it is your will, take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. Then an angel appeared from heaven, strengthening him, and he, being in agony, prayed more earnestly. Then his sweat was, as it were, as great drops of blood falling down to the ground. Mark 14:39 says, and again he went away, and he prayed the same words. Matthew says, Matthew 26:44, and he left them, and he went away and prayed the 3rd time, saying the same words. It's about Jesus. Jesus prayed a cry of his humanity, a cry of agony, a prayer for deliverance. He prayed it repeatedly, and the answer was no. The Son of God was told no. Why? The will of the Father needed to be done. It occurred to me, could it be, it brought to my mind, Paul was told no, and it was in Paul's best interest. The Son of God was told no because the will of the Father needed to be done. Could it be that there is something that is more important than the pain that I'm enduring? Could it be that there are souls that might be reached if I remain in this condition? And I'm thinking about ending my pain, but the Lord is seeing souls and opportunities. Maybe there's somebody who's searching for the truth, and providentially, they might learn the truth through me. When, I guess about a year ago, we had a fellow that moved to Cookville. He was in McMinnville. He got moved to Cookville because he got put in the hospital. He had a roommate. His roommate came home drinking. And he said, we're not going to have that. You're out of here. And his roommate was drunk at the time. And so he said, you got to move out now. I'm not going to have you drinking. And his roommate wouldn't do it. He went and got a box of his stuff and he said, come on, you're leaving. And his roommate pulled out a Glock and shot him 3 times in the apartment. He shot him and left 1 bullet lodged in his neck, 1 shattered his arm, and the other pierced his spinal cord. He was left as a paraplegic, but worse than me because I'm paralyzed from here down. He's got about the same paralysis, but he also lost full use of his hands. Very limited on what he could do with his hands. Somebody told me about him, and I went to the hospital and I started meeting with him. After a few weeks, we started going through Bible studies together, and we baptized him. We had to bring an inflatable pool into the hospital, fill it with water with a water hose, and then we had to have a Hoyer lift, pick him up, and sit him into the pool and baptize him, but we baptized him there in the hospital. Would I have been able to do that had I not been in this condition? I don't know, maybe. Something that has helped me. Let's do the next slide. I'd like to recommend to you this book by Brother Dan Winkler. I'm not going to talk about it all right now, but it's called Something Happened When I Prayed, and it is a great book. Let's go to the next slide. Something else that I would suggest as a benefit of suffering is that suffering humbles us. This entire experience humbled me. Before this accident, I was physically very strong. I worked out every day. Financially, I was quite comfortable. I had control of my life. At work, at GBN, I was the boss. When everything is going your way, it's easy to get full of yourself. You think that you are self-sufficient. But after this accident, a full team of highly skilled doctors could not do anything to help me. And it makes you realize how weak you are and how dependent you are, how much you depend on God. An accident like this will humble you in ways you've never been humbled. I watched my dad, who is 80 now, was 70 whatever at the time, picking up my lame body and moving it around, and it was humbling. I've had several occasions where in my manual wheelchair, I would come out of my ramp in my van, and at the bottom of the ramp there'll be something like a rock. And those front casters are small, so when you're coming down the ramp and you hit it, it'll throw you out. I've been thrown out of my chair. People say, have you ever fallen out of this chair? This chair doesn't fall. But a regular chair, it'll dump you out. I've fallen on the ground, I don't know how many times. One occasion, I'm at GBN, I hit a rock, it's summertime, and I'm in the gravel, and it throws me out in that hot summer gravel, and I'm laying there. Of course, I can't feel it, but it ripped my pants. They were bleeding through my pants, and of course, I can't get back to my chair. I can't move. Aaron Gallagher, my coworker, I see him pulling in the front, and I yelled, got his attention. He came back there, and he picked me up. Aaron's 6'4", big guy, lifts me up, and he's holding me up to him to put me back in my chair, and it was humiliating. I don't know why. I couldn't help it. It's humiliating. You know, James 4:6 says, God resists the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. Sometimes it's good for us to be humble. Let's go to the next slide. Suffering makes us sympathetic toward other people. Romans 12:15 says that we're to weep with those who weep. Galatians 5:22, one of the fruit of the Spirit is kindness. And one thing an injury like this will do is it will make you kinder to other people. It will make you more patient with other people. I've said in the past somebody would pull out in front of me and I would get so irritated. Why are they going so slow? Now I get to thinking, maybe they're pulling out slowly because they're trying not to sling around a wheelchair in the back, like I am. Makes you look at things differently. Since the accident, I have had so many people reach out to me because they've lost their spouse, they've had the death of a child. That seems to be the most intense grief that I ever observe, is people that have lost a child. I haven't seen anything that seems to compare with what it does to a person. Cancer, divorcees, miscarriages. We're all suffering in different ways. We're all going to suffer. You know, Job 14:1, Job says, man that is born of woman is few days and full of trouble. If you haven't been down that road yet, it's just a matter of time. We're surrounded by people who are hurting. It made me realize I'm not alone. Here's the next one, number 4. It purifies us. Suffering's good because it purifies us. Now, what do I mean by that? When I realized how close I came to dying, it made me search my life for shortcomings and sin, because I'm riding along having a great day, and then bam, I open my eyes in the hospital. And I've thought 1,000 times, what if I had opened my eyes in eternity? Where would I have been? 2 Corinthians 13:5 says, examine yourselves whether you're in the faith. Test yourselves. What does that mean, whether you're in the faith? Somebody says, oh, it means whether you're a Christian. This is written to Christians. Christians, examine yourselves whether you're in the faith. You know what it means? Same thing as 1 John 1:7. Are you walking in light? Examine yourself. Make sure you're walking in light. Test yourselves. Psalm 119 and verse 67, David said that he went astray before he was afflicted. Verse 71, he says, it's good for me that I've been afflicted, that I might learn your statutes. What is it? Suffering has helped me to get myself together, and to study your word is what he said. Let's go to the next slide. This is the last point. I want to suggest to you some things that I, from my personal experience, have helped me get through tragedy. I've had folks say to me, Don, I don't know how you do it. I just crawl up in the house and curl up and die, or just lay there and not do anything. You can't do that. You got to go. I mean, as long as we're here on this earth, you got to keep going. Here's my first suggestion. Don't live in the past. Ecclesiastes chapter 7 and verse 10 says this, do not say, why were the former days better than these? You do not inquire wisely concerning this. Don't look back and say, well, it used to be better than this. Brethren, one of the greatest torments that I have found is living in the past. When I sit and think how good it used to be before the accident, and I slip into it, when I do that, it takes me to a bad place. It can be almost anything. It can be, I used to love to cut the grass, and I like to just walk around in the grass, smell the fresh cut grass. I miss doing that. It could be jumping out of the car, pumping the gas in the winter when you're out there shivering and it's miserable. I didn't think I'd ever miss that, but I missed that. I found living in the past takes me to bad places. It's a tormentor. Sometimes people do that with regard to sin. They can't stop beating themselves up for their past sin. Living in the past is a tormentor. And that's the thing about the past, is it's in the past. And you can't change it. We all have to pick up where we are and go forward. Philippians 3:13, Paul says, this one thing I do, forgetting the things that are behind and reaching forward to the things which are before, I press toward the mark for the prize of the high calling of God which is in Christ Jesus. We can let the bad, we can let our bad, how do I want to say it? It can get the best of us. When we sit and think about these things, it takes us to bad places, or we can grow from the past and say, I'm going to go forward. One way or another, the past is in the past, and I've got to leave it there. Here's the next one, next slide, number 2. If you want to get through tragedy, count your blessings. Now you know the song, count your many blessings, name them one by one, and it will surprise you what the Lord has done. Did you know that's right out of the Bible? Psalm 103 verse 2 says, bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not his bountiful blessings. You know what that means? Count your many blessings. Some days I have found myself thinking, I've got it worse than anybody. I'm a paraplegic. I can't move my body from here down. The things that I have to go through, the pain that I endure, I can't sleep on one side because it hurts so bad. During the night, I have to prop pillows up under myself and I can barely move. I got to wake up during the night and put my feet up on pillows so that my legs won't get all swollen. If I just began to describe to you a day that I endure, you would think I feel terrible for me. I get to thinking that way and I think nobody's got it worse than me. But then I get to thinking about other things and I think, you know, when I was in the hospital, they said that a lot of people, when they go through something like this, their spouse says, I didn't sign up for this, and they leave. Their boyfriend or girlfriend especially, I didn't sign up for this, My wife has stayed with me. She takes care of me every day. I still have my job. I can still preach the gospel. I've got hand controls so that I can drive a van that the brethren bought for me. I get to thinking about things like that, and I think, man, nobody's got it better than me. Now, what's the difference in that? Whether it's a matter of perspective. So much, and this is true whether you've had an accident or not, so much of life has to do with what we do with our minds. You know, I think about Numbers chapter 11. God had rescued the children of Israel from Egypt. He's giving them food from heaven and taking care of them. But listen to their attitude. Numbers chapter 11 and verse 4. They said, who will give us meat to eat? We remember the fish that we ate freely in Egypt, and the cucumbers and the melons and the leeks and the onions and the garlic. They said, oh, we remember that good food we had back in Egypt, but now our whole soul is dried up and there's nothing to eat except this manna. Who gave them the manna? They said, we wish we had all those other things, but they're ignoring the blessings that God had given them. One thing I know is this. Whenever I stop counting my bruises and I count my blessings, it always changes my feelings. Here's the next one. Next slide, number 3. To help you get through suffering, remember why you're here. I remember why I'm here. There is a book I want to read you a quote from. The author of the book was Sister Jane Porter. We had the privilege of knowing Sister Jane when I preached in Fayette County, Alabama. She wrote this book called Let This Cup Pass, and it's a lady's book. It was written after she had a tragic accident that nearly killed her and handicapped her for the rest of her life. This is what she said. We are here to prepare ourselves for life after death. It doesn't matter whether we live 50 years or 100 years. Neither does it matter whether those years are carefree or filled with sorrow. The only consideration of lasting importance is where we will spend eternity. You see, we get to thinking, I'm so unhappy because I miss my truck. Or I'm so unhappy because I miss whatever physical pleasure it is, you fill in the blank. And I'm afraid that we have fallen into the trap of thinking that's why we're here. We think that we are here so that we can fix up our house and we can take vacations, and we're working toward that stage that we'll have plenty of money and we can vacation, and we've got a motor home and we've got a boat, and I want to go fishing and I want to be happy and entertained and live the good life. And if that's not what happens, oh, I'm so miserable. I got to remember, that's not why I'm here. We talked about in Bible class this morning, John 9:4. Jesus said, I must work the works of him that sent me while it is day, for the night cometh when no man can work. That's why I'm here. How much time did Jesus spend on his yacht? How much time did Jesus spend taking camel tours with his buddies? Or looking for that largemouth bass that he can hang on his wall? Now, I'm not saying it's wrong to vacation, and I'm not saying it's wrong to go fishing or have a boat. I'm saying that our things sometimes make us lose our focus of why we're here. And so I've got to remember why I'm here, and it makes it not hurt so bad when I lose those things. Ecclesiastes 12:13, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter, fear God and keep his commandments. This is the whole of man. Next slide, number 4. To help get through these tragedies, Christianity makes all of the difference. It was 2019, I was in the hospital, it was Father's Day. I remember that because my middle daughter Lauren and her husband Casey came to visit, and when they left I was very sad. Oftentimes the kids leave and you're sad, and you're in the hospital, it's even sadder. And after they left, I have an iPhone, and the iPhone does this strange thing. It takes your pictures and it puts them to music, and it creates what it calls a memory, and it sends you a little video. And I'm in the hospital and my phone bings and it says, you have a memory. And I open it, and it is a video of a Disney trip that my family had made together, and it had created a video out of it. And it brought me, still hard for me to talk about. It brought me very low. And at the end of the video, I'm standing there, I've got my arms around my kids and my wife, and I look so happy. And I thought, I'll never do that again. And I thought, I don't know how I'm going to go on. I thought, I can't live like this. And I pulled the covers over me. Sherry was sitting in the chair on the other side. And I was trying to not let her see me cry because I didn't want her to hurt more. And as I was laying there, I thought to myself, I'm a Christian. This is all temporary. I'm going to die, and I'm going to go to heaven. And then I got to thinking about all the people in the hospital with me. And I thought, that's misery. Can you imagine living your life as a paraplegic or a quadriplegic and dying and being lost? Being a healthy person and dying and being lost? And that began to put things in perspective. And it made me think, I've got a mission, and I want to reach people with the gospel. And whether I'm a one-talent man, a two-talent man, a five-talent man, or a two-talent man who used to be a five-talent man, whatever it is, I've got to use that to reach souls with the gospel. And I started trying to go from room to room in that hospital and carry DVDs and trying to talk to people. Whatever it is, I've got to use to magnify the Lord and His name. If I could trade all, in fact, go ahead and show the next slide. I found the picture later, and this was it. And it makes me happy in one sense to see it, in another sense it really brings me low, but that was the picture. If I could trade all of my earthly possessions, if somebody said, Don, if you will give up everything you have, all of your money, your cars, your house, your job, you'll be unemployed, you'll have not a penny to your name, no clothes on your back, but we can guarantee your body will be restored to like it was the day before the accident. I wouldn't even stop and think. I would say, done. But there's one thing I would never trade, and that's my soul. Go to the next slide. Matthew 16:26, Jesus said, for what profit is it to a man if he gains the whole world and yet loses his soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? This is temporary. I'm 51 years old. It's gone fast. As a paraplegic, I probably will live a shorter life. That's typical. It's not going to be that long. And I think, I can do this. If I live to be 80 or 90, it's not going to be that long. What is your life? It's even a vapor. I might call it less than that. It's not going to be that long. I can do this. And you can do this. In the meantime, don't trade yourself. Maybe you're here today and you haven't been living faithfully. Maybe you're a child of God and you need to make some changes and be restored. Examine yourselves, whether you be in the faith. Test yourselves, 2 Corinthians 13:5. Maybe today you want to make your life right. Rededicate yourself to the service of the Lord. Be restored because you've been unfaithful. We would be very honored if we could go to God and pray for you. Maybe you're here and you want to obey the gospel. No greater thing could you choose to do than that. The last lesson we had earlier today was about how to become a Christian and be a part of the one church you read about in the Bible. That involves hearing, believing, repenting, confessing, being baptized for the remission of your sins. If you want to do that, we would be so delighted to assist you. This afternoon, you need to respond to the Lord's invitation. Won't you come? Together we stand and sing.